Welcome to the Shepherd Podcast. Thank you so much for watching today. It's a great joy to share with you the lives of people who are a part of the ministry here at Shepherd of the Hills. And today I'm really pleased to be able to introduce you to a member of our church. He hasn't been a member for a long time, but he has been very involved in the Lutheran Church for many decades and has had some really important roles, and I really look forward to sharing with you his life story and his faith journey. So I'd like to introduce you now to Al Czanderna. Al, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yes.
I'm very pleased to be here.
Great. Well, why don't we start out with just a little bit about you? I want to spend a good amount of time talking about your service to the church at large, because there's some really good stuff in there. But first of all, can you tell us a little bit about your background, your career, your education, those kinds of things?
Yes, well, I started primer at the age of 5, so that I graduated from high school at 17, because I did primer in first grade in the first year. And then I was living in LaPorte, Indiana, where there was an extension center for Purdue University for the freshman year. So I took my freshman year there, and then I went on campus for the last 3 years. Graduated in 1951 in June with a Bachelor of Science degree in Metallurgical Engineering. And that served me well. I then was in the Air Force for 21 months. And while I was there, I met my wife, Lucy, which is a question later on. When I was released from the Air Force, when I was discharged from the Air Force, I had the GI Bill, so I went back to Purdue University and I got my doctorate in physical chemistry. And so that has served me extremely well in my career, because you can do almost anything in science with a doctorate in physical chemistry.
Okay. And so what did you do with it?
So I spent 8 years working with Union Carbide as a research scientist and working on their problems. Then I went to Clarkson University, and they didn't have any positions available in physical chemistry, but I had an 18-hour minor in physics in my graduate career, which was close to 24. So they asked me if I would like to be a professor of physics, and I said yes. So I joined the Clarkson faculty as associate professor of physics and was promoted to full professor after 3 years. And that was 1968, and I stayed there until 1978. And during that time, I had been consulting with Los Alamos National Laboratory, and I realized that all the effort that I spent writing proposals so I could do research along with teaching was a lot easier at a national laboratory. So the Solar Energy Research Institute was formed in 1978, and I applied, and they were going to interview 3 people. They interviewed me first and offered me the position. So I joined the Solar Energy Research Institute in 1978. And in 1991, President Bush renamed it to be the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. And the whole mission of SERI, S-E-R-I, is to find economical ways of collecting solar energy for use by the public. So that's what I spent the last 22 years of my career doing.
Really?
Yeah.
What did you enjoy most about those last 22 years?
Oh, well, I had as many as 15 people that I supervised, and the research that we got to do was just so interesting. That one of the scientists I had was from Taiwan. His name was Fujian Pern. He was a brilliant Chinese person. And so I gave him the toughest problems, and he solved the problem of getting a stable polymer to encapsulate silicon for collecting solar energy. And he patented it. He wanted me to be a co-author on the patent, but I says, no, John. I said, I told you when you came to work with me that even if I contributed, I would want you to have the patent so you could get all the royalties. So he patented this polymer, which is used and is now lasting for 25 years. Wow. And he was looking for a 20-year lifetime. And he is getting royalties of $70,000 a year.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, good for him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was basically my career. I continued to consult for Siri by going to a number of meetings that they did not really want to attend, which were related to the stability of materials. And so I did that for another 4 years after I had retired. So officially I retired in 2004, and I've been retired since.
Okay. Wow. I mean, the kind of stuff you did, I feel like I would not have the very beginning level of understanding of how that works. That is big stuff and takes a lot of education and a lot of intellect to do.
And it was so much fun. And
Yeah.
I'd go to work in the morning and I was driving up South Wadsworth Boulevard, which was one of the main arteries towards my work. And I would leave at 6 o'clock in the morning so I would not have a traffic to contend with. Mm-hmm. And I'd start thinking about what I was going to do during the day. And I said, and then I'd chuckle and I said, I'm going to get paid for doing this.
Wow.
That's how much I enjoyed my work.
You know you're in the right field when you enjoy it that much, right?
Yes.
Yeah, well, God wired you a certain way. He put you in the right place, and
Oh.
you made a difference through that work.
Yes.
Yeah. You know, one thing I said I wanted to visit with you about, Micah and I the other day, we were talking about the intersection of faith and science. And, you know, science is such a big conversation now when it comes to the virus and how all of that works. And I was just wondering your perspective on the intersection of faith and science. Some people see them as contradicting, and some people will say, oh no, they actually complement each other very well. Your perspective?
I'm in the latter category. And if you go onto Wikipedia on the internet, you can find about 50 pages of all kinds of views of the difference between science and religion. Mm-hmm. But to my way of thinking, God created the heavens and the earth. He created everything that has order. And all science can do is unravel what God has created and understand it.
I like that. That's a really memorable way to say it. All science can do is unravel what God has put together. Yeah. Great, thank you. That's a really helpful way to think about it.
Incidentally, probably 23% of the scientists would agree with me because the other 77% don't believe in God.
Would you say that those numbers are it's about a 3/4 and 1/4 split?
Yeah, no, that's I read the statistics online yesterday, and they've done numerous surveys, and it ranges from 23 to 25% of scientists are Christian.
Wow. So we have a big mission field there, right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Great. Well, God willing, he'll work through those 25% to make a positive impact on the other 75. Yeah. Well, you know, we could talk about your background in science and the things that you did there for quite a while. That would be an episode all in itself. But I know you and I were both very excited to talk about your service to the church.
Yes.
Which has been a big part of your life.
Yes.
And by the church, I mean the church at large, our denomination.
Yes.
I'd love for you just to tell us a little bit about your service to the church at large, perhaps an overview, and then would love to spend some time. The Board of Higher Education was a really big piece of your service. And
yes. No, I served on a number of committees in the Eastern District of the Missouri Synod, for which the president of the Eastern District sought me out and asked me to lead these committees, and they had all kinds of different purposes. But I had a friend by the name of Alfonso Bagiancilla, and I won't go into great detail, but he was a pastor of Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, and I got acquainted with him in detail because he was a vicar and he preached in Richmond, Virginia, West Virginia, and Charleston, West Virginia, 50 miles apart, and then drove another 60 miles to a congregation of 20 in Somerville. And so when I learned about this, I said, after you finish the second service in Charleston, I said, I will drive you there. And if you want to sleep in the back of the car, you do so. Oh. So I became great friends with him. And we learned an awful lot about what was going on from each other.
Wow.
And So that was a special privilege that I had. But he and another person nominated me to become a member of the Board for Higher Education.
Okay.
And so I was nominated, I was selected. I had, out of 1,100 delegates, I had 686 votes, which was more than President Bryce got.
Oh, congratulations. Should have put you up for president.
I just chuckle at that. But I was highly recommended by Christian News and Affirm, because they sent me surveys of what my faith position was.
Okay.
And it was exactly what they wanted. And so they highly recommended me. And so I was elected, and I served on the board starting in 1973. 1979, I was elected vice chairman. 1981, I was elected chairman. And I was in the American Vacuum Society at that time, where they had the procedure for having a chairman-elect, a chairman, and an immediate past chairman. So I introduced that to the Board of Higher Education. So in 1983, I voluntarily stepped down and served as immediate past chairman to help the new chairman out.
Oh, okay.
And so I served as the chairman, and the highlight of being a chairman was going to the board of directors and making the case of why we should establish Christ College at Irvine.
Oh.
And they established that. And so as a result of that knowledge, Ray Hall, who became president of Christ College, invited me to be the speaker for, what did they call it? It was acknowledging that it was now a unit of the Synod.
Okay.
And so I gave that speech, and someone said to me after the speech, "Where did you learn to be such a good public speaker?" And I said, "Well, I've been teaching physics for a number of years." And I said, "You do a lot of lectures."
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Why don't we just pause right there?
Yes.
Let's assume that our viewers don't know anything about how the LCMS works, the Board of Higher Education. What was that board in charge of, and how did that function within the church body at large?
Okay. We had, in 1973, we had 12 colleges, such as Concordia River Forest. So there were 12 Concordias, and there were 4 in Canada that we were responsible for.
Oh, okay.
And so each one of these units had a board of control. Also, you could call it a board of trustees that took care of the particular needs of that unit of the Synod. But the policy that governed all of them was set by the Board for Higher Education.
Okay.
So we would have members of the boards of control come with us and meet with us and tell us what some of their needs were as a policy that we could make that would help them out.
I see.
And so we basically were a servant of the Synod for governing the policy for all of the seminary, or all of the Concordias that we have.
Okay. And I can see how you were a good fit for that, having been in higher education
Yes.
yourself and being a very dedicated member of the Lutheran Church. I can see how you were a natural fit to serve on that board.
I was a natural fit.
Yeah.
And we had another member, Art Brackenbush from Missoula, Montana, who was chairman from 1979 to 1981. And we used to have a docket. And it was prepared by Art Allschweid, who was the executive secretary. And basically the docket was leading us around by the nose. And after about 2 years, Art Brackenbush said, we cannot be controlled by the docket. We have more important things to do than to respond to all of this. This docket we can deal with in about 15 minutes. And he said, I want us to really deal with the policies that we can make that will help all of our synodical colleges out. He was a great leader,
Okay.
and he still lives.
Oh.
And I still correspond with him.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Wow. Those are some
Yeah.
Great connections there.
Yeah, so I'm 90 and Art's 87.
And you just turned 90.
I did, yes.
In May, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so big milestone year for
the
you.
The Lord has blessed me with a great life.
Absolutely. Well, and you've been a blessing throughout that life. I just want to go back.
Yes.
So during your tenure on the board, you guys established Christ College in Irvine, which became Concordia University
Yes.
in Irvine.
Yes.
And I want you to know my sister is a graduate of that institution. So on behalf of my family, thank you for establishing it.
Well, no, I didn't establish it. I helped lead it.
Yeah,
so,
yeah. Well, so that was a very key accomplishment for the board.
I represented the board as a chairman. I went into the board of directors because the board of directors, the Senate, had to approve the expenditure. So we made the case of why we should have one there. And I said, the nearest ones are Portland and Austin. I said, what are we going to do with all these people in Southern California? We need a university there.
Yeah.
And so the board of directors unanimously adopted the budget for building it.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's a great institution. And so that was one of the biggest issues that was a part of your time on the board. Were there any other issues that you would say were real big issues during those 13 years?
The overwhelming one, which was both a good issue and a bad issue, was when resolution of a script, and I have a copy of it here for you. It's I didn't give it to you, did I?
You gave me one paper over here. You gave me
that's it. That's the paper. When that was adopted, that's 309 was adopted in New Orleans. The faculty at St. Louis Seminary walked out. They said, we're not going to be guided by this. We insist on being able to use a historical critical method for interpreting Scripture. And that document, which was adopted by the Synod in convention, said you will not do that.
Now, can you just stop and explain what the difference is between what this document confesses versus the historical critical method?
This document says that what the way Scripture is written is what God intended. And so when you interpret the Bible, you have to say the Bible interprets itself. Historical critical method applies human reason to what's in Scripture. And if something doesn't make sense, they say, well, that can't be right. For example, alcohol is C2H5OH, 2 carbon atoms with 3 hydrogens on one and 2 hydrogens and a hydroxyl group on another. So it's C2H5OH. And so at the wedding of Cana, Jesus converted water into wine. And so human reason says, well, there's no carbon in there in water, so how could Jesus do that? So we just have to say that this is an example of what God could do rather than what he did do.
That's a big difference.
A huge difference.
Yeah.
And so that meant that all the miracles that God performed, that Jesus performed, could have been questioned. And so we simply told the faculty, we directed them, you may not use the historical critical method. And so they walked out.
And tell us what percentage of the faculty of the seminary walked out?
There were 34 professors, 5 remained.
5 out of 34 remained?
No, 5 out of 39 remained.
5 out of 39
And they taught all the courses for the 50 students that remained. 400 students walked out along with the professors.
And this was a huge episode in the history of our church body.
And a very unfortunate episode.
Yeah.
But it was that the leader there, John Teachin, was the president, and the faculty who basically worshipped at his footstep, at his knees, said, we're going to go with him. And so they all walked out, and so we had the task of replacing 34 professors and 400 students. And God gave us such a wonderful blessing, because we said we can't go to all the colleges and take all of the people out of their theology departments, because then what are they going to do? Mm-hmm. So we concluded that we would seek people that had academic credentials who were parish pastors. Mm. And the wonderful beauty of that is that the students got to learn from people who had parish pastor experience. Wow. Instead of theoretical experience. It was a great blessing for the church, as it turned out.
Wow, God works for good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. And this was early on in your time on the board for higher education, within the first year or two. So welcome to the board, right? Yeah. You got the biggest crisis in the history of the denomination.
Yes,
welcome
that's
to the board.
Yeah. Absolutely. No.
Wow. So that's how
said,
it worked
thanks
out.
God when it happened.
Yeah.
Because it was a lot of work. I mean, I spent about 6 weeks out of every year, full time, 6 weeks, just with my board for higher education work.
Really?
You know.
Wow, that was a lot.
You know, there were 6 meetings a year, and initially we met in St. Louis all the time. And so after a couple of years of that, I suggested that we start having our meetings at the various campuses, mm-hmm. so that we could become acquainted with all of the different institutions that we were serving. Mm-hmm. And that went over extremely well, because we got to meet with the boards of control at each one of those units, and we got to become familiar with the faculty. We met with the faculty and talked with them. Mm-hmm. And so that was one of the suggestions I made in my life that was really a good one.
Very good. That's so interesting. You know, I've heard about that time and studied it very briefly, but they don't go into a whole lot of detail on it in seminary coursework, and there's not a whole lot of really good literature. You're a great source on that time. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Seminex time, the walkout? What happened to all of those who walked out? Where did they go? And then, you know, I really appreciate the idea of bringing in the parish pastors to rebuild the program, but kind of look at both sides. The walkout, where did they go? And then how did we rebuild the program from so small back to where it grew to?
Yeah, well, let's take the walkout first.
Sure.
They went to Chicago, and ultimately they joined ELCA, which is Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, which was formed from the Lutheran Church of America, the American Lutheran Church. And so ultimately all of them ended up in ELCA. Okay. In rebuilding the church, we had 5 professors there that were teaching all the courses. And so we got recommendations from lots of people. Paul Zimmerman, for example, was president of Concordia River Forest, and he helped us tremendously with recommending pastors that we could bring in to be professors at St. Louis. Uh-huh. And we had 2 or 3 other that I've forgotten their names since then, but we got help from lots of people to find the pastors that we repopulated this seminary with.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned, it's worth saying a second time that the students were so grateful for being able to be taught by people who had been in parishes, really? So that they really knew what it was like to deal with a congregation.
Yeah.
Such as you do. What
a blessing. I mean, you never know what kind of good things God will bring out of a messy situation, and it sounded like you really did there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, so you were very involved in that. That was early on in your time.
Yes.
And I assume that then over the rest of your time on the board for higher education, you saw the seminary grow little by little?
Well, it grew fairly fast.
Did it grow fast?
Yeah, it grew fairly quickly, yes.
Okay.
And in 4 years, we were back to where we started from.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
1974 to 1978, and it was just incredible.
Wow, that's amazing. Now, what effect did this have on the denomination as a whole? I mean, this theological dilemma, it couldn't have just affected the seminary, because the seminary affects the church body, what's being taught, what's being put out there. Yeah. You know, did it take some time to get everybody on the same page throughout the country?
Well, yes, it did, because most of the graduates of St. Louis Seminary were in tune with this historical critical method, and they were preaching and teaching that in their congregations, and they all had to be replaced. And
Really?
that took years. That took a couple decades.
Wow.
But those that went out, we went to the district presidents and said, wherever you have these people that have graduated from St. Louis Seminary, you need to go to the congregation, find out what they're being taught by their pastors, and if they're being taught things that really aren't scriptural, that they've got to dispose of those pastors.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a long process.
Ooh, that must have been painful, especially congregations where there's a relationship between the pastor and the members. I mean, that had to be very painful for everybody.
Yeah, it was. And the district president said that it was difficult going into a congregation where they were really like the pastor, mm-hmm. but they realized that we're going to have to replace him.
Wow. There's just so much there.
Because it's an emotional thing when you get personally attached to a person. You say, this is my pastor. And you say, but he's not teaching us the right thing.
Wow. Now, do you keep up with what's going on in the Synod now? Do you read up on it?
Not too much.
Not too much?
Not too much, no.
Yeah. I would think that all of those years of being on the inside would give you a very interesting perspective about everything that goes on.
But just so that you would know, I came to this church for 3 times, and I listened to your sermons, and I said, he's solid.
Woo, good. I'm glad I passed your test. If I passed your test, I know I'm okay.
But, one of your questions was, well, why did I come here? And it was the nearest church. I mean, it's a 10-minute drive, as Barbara knows. And I didn't know that she was a charter member, but I came here and I listened to the sermons, and I said, they're solid. So I applied for my transfer, and here I am.
Yeah. And just so you all know, we've got Barbara Hartfield sitting off camera. She was Al's transportation, and you guys actually live in a place that's walking distance from my house, so we're in the same.
Oh, really?
neighborhood. Yeah.
Yeah, we live at the Villa di San Antonio.
Right.
And it's a wonderful place. And my daughter who lives here, it's a question later on, but my daughter who lives here in San Antonio, my youngest daughter, Connie, when they came here, they could not find a good Lutheran church because they came in 1995. That was before this church really became solid. So they're members of the United Methodist Church at Alamo Heights, but I've been there, and what they are preaching and teaching is really solid. So they picked a good Methodist church as it is.
Okay.
But she's the reason that I came to San Antonio.
Okay.
I had bladder cancer in 2016. I had 35 radiation treatments over a 7-week period that killed the cancer, and it's still dead. And that's a thanksgiving to God for that. But she was there, and so she drove me to all of these radiation treatments over a 7-week period. And since there was a chance that the cancer would come back, she said, Dad, I think it would be better if you just moved to San Antonio. And then if I have to take you to a doctor's there, well, I'll be right there instead of being away from my husband for 7 weeks.
Okay, so that's how you ended up in San Antonio. And God's protected your health ever since then?
He has, No,
fantastic.
I just had a cystoscopy about a month ago, and it's still negative.
Fantastic.
So,
that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yes. So we got into family a little bit. Why don't you tell us about your wife, your children, a little more about the family?
Okay, yes. Well, I went to... I was in the Air Force, and I needed a church, and so I wrote to my pastor in LaPorte, Indiana. I said, what church would you recommend? And he said, Concordia, Peach Orchard Road. And so I joined Concordia. Then Pastor Hussman, who was the pastor, had his 25th anniversary celebration, and here was this older lady, Turns out she was 25 and I was 22, sitting on a step with a woman there with, and excuse me, Barbara, but with a little old lady with white hair who was about 50 years old. Remember, I'm 22 now. And so I got her phone number. I called her the next morning at 8:05, and I said, you know, I'd like to take you out and go to a movie. And she says, well, I'm playing a ball game, and it was right across the street from where my barracks were. So I went to see her ball game, and we went to Steeltown, and I took her home, and so we stood at the door, and she said, wouldn't you like to kiss me goodnight?
Wow.
So of course, you know, I'd kissed her during Steeltown because there was a kissing scene in there. But after we were married, she said, honey, I wanted to explain why I asked you to kiss me goodnight. She said, my brother Don said that, sis, when you go out with a guy, if you don't get kissed goodnight on the first night, you can just forget about him.
Oh, wow. Okay. Wow, that was your mindset going into it.
Yeah. So we went, you know, I asked her to go steady with me in 2 weeks. I asked her to marry me in 2 months. In 4 months after we met, I asked her, she accepted because she had met my parents. And we got married 8 months later. Okay. And one pastor that heard about this said, I wouldn't have recommended you. I mean, it's a miracle that you're still married. And I said, well, I wouldn't call it that, Pastor, but I said, you know, we were just so well suited, and God has blessed our marriage. And I says, I don't expect that we will be married to anyone else for the rest of our lives. We were married 59 years when Lucy died in 2012. Oh. She had bladder cancer, which was killed, but then they had to take her bladder out, and it had metastasized to her lung, and we didn't know it. So ultimately, she died of lung cancer in 2012.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. You know, it even adds more meaning to the fact you had bladder cancer as well.
Yes.
And, you know, you submit prayers on the anniversary of being pronounced healthy. And, you know, you've seen what it can do to a person firsthand. Yes. So we give thanks that you've been healthy after that. We
had 3 children. She had endometriosis. This is a funny story. She had endometriosis and had an ovary removed, and this was 4 months before we actually got married, and 10 months before we were going to get married. Mm-hmm. So we met with the doctor after the ovary was removed, and he said, my advice to you is that you need to get pregnant as soon as possible. So we said simultaneously, but we're not married. And he says, I'm giving you a medical opinion, not a theological one.
Oh, wow.
We talked about that all of our lives.
Wow.
We were blessed. We got married on February 14th of 1953. And Kathy was born 9 months and 27 days later.
Is that right?
Yeah, she was our oldest daughter. And then we had 2 more, Carol, who is now living in Dubuque, Iowa, and with whom I talk about once every 2 or 3 days. Mm-hmm. And Connie, who lives here in San Antonio with her husband. Okay. They bought a house in 1995. They were an Air Force men of the West. They're both musicians. Mm-hmm. Bill plays the trumpet. Connie plays several instruments, the clarinet, the saxophone, and the bassoon.
Okay.
And so that's why I'm here, is because they thought it would be a great idea for me to come down and live here. But they built a residence here because their duty was at the Air Force Band of the West. Right. And Bill still plays trumpet for various institutions. At the recent Heart of Texas concert band a concert for the 4th of July, he played trumpet as someone that they needed as an extra. Mm-hmm. And my granddaughter, Kayla, plays the oboe, and she plays the oboe all the time with the Heart of Texas concert band. There are 86 musicians. They pay $226 a year to play. for these free concerts for the public.
Wow.
Isn't that incredible?
It really is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was
Wow.
kind of a divergence from what we were talking about.
No, that's family.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to just think about everything we've talked about: family, career, service to the church.
Yeah.
You've had a very full life, a very rich life. Looking at your life, 90
Yes.
years.
Yes.
How have you seen the Lord at work? How would you say your faith has helped you in your life?
Oh, well, I have the CD that says your faith is a gift of God. And I said, gee, Lord, thanks for this faith, because I know what's going to happen when I die. I know I'm going to be raised with a glorified body. I have nothing to worry about. And thank you for the gift of faith. And I had a wife who had the same kind of a faith. I mean, we were just so compatible with each other. And Lucy was, I wish I could have brought her here, but God had other plans for her.
Sure.
Yeah. But couldn't have asked for a better wife. Don't know what I could have asked for.
Yeah. What a blessing.
Yeah.
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 Well, it's obvious,
Yeah.
we see the hand of God at work in your life, and I want to thank you so much for sharing your life with us today and going into all these different areas. It sure has been interesting and enjoyable, so thank you, Al, for our conversation.
Thank you for the invitation. I hope members of the congregation enjoy seeing this, and if they have any questions, my phone's in the phone book. And it's 303-669-4044. Just give me a call and I'll be glad to fill you in.
All right. Thank you, Al. And thank you so much for watching us. I know you enjoyed hearing from Al. Really covered a lot of interesting things and just great to get to know him. And I hope you'll continue to stay tuned for our podcast episodes.
Yeah.
Until then, we'll see you next time. God's blessings.